To the world, Johnny Cash was a powerful voice, a legendary musician, and the unforgettable Man in Black. Millions admired his songs and the strong image he carried throughout his life. But behind that fame, there were parts of his personal story that even his own family did not fully know. Years after Johnny Cash passed away, his daughter Rosanne Cash began learning surprising truths about their family history, things that had remained hidden while he was alive. These discoveries slowly changed the way she understood her father and the life he had lived. What Rosanne uncovered was not just a simple family detail, but a deeper story that had stayed buried for decades. And when those hidden pieces finally came to light, they revealed a side of Johnny Cash's life that many people had never heard before. Born J.R. Cash in 1932 in Kingsland, Arkansas, the boy who would later become Johnny Cash grew up in a crowded household with 6 siblings. Even his name reflected a compromise. His mother preferred John, while his father liked Ray, so they settled on the simple initials. J.R. Life in the Cash family was far from easy. In 1935, during the hardships of the Great Depression, they joined a government resettlement program launched under President Franklin D. Roosevelt and moved to the farming community of Dyess, Arkansas. There, every member of the family worked long days in the cotton fields. Yet even amid exhaustion and poverty, music filled the air. The Cash family often sang while they worked, their voices echoing across the fields. But tragedy struck early in Johnny's life. His older brother Jack, the sibling he felt closest to, suffered a horrific accident involving a table saw. Severely injured, Jack passed away a week later. The loss left a deep mark on young Johnny. Struggling to understand the pain and grief, he found comfort in music. Gospel songs in particular became his refuge. With guidance from his mother and a family friend, he learned to play guitar and began writing songs before he was even 12 years old. In the early 1950s, as the United States became involved in the conflict in Korea, Cash enlisted in the Air Force and was stationed in West Germany. Before leaving America, he had met Vivian Liberto at a roller skating rink. Their romance survived the distance, and when he returned home, the two were married. Now with a young family to support, Cash moved to Memphis, Tennessee, where he took a job selling appliances. But music kept calling him back. Eventually, he gathered the courage to audition for Sun Records, the label run by Sam Phillips. His first try featured mostly gospel songs, but Phillips famously encouraged him to return with something less strictly religious. Cash came back with a new sound influenced by rockabilly, and by 1955, he had recorded songs like Hey Porter and Cry, 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 early successes that hinted a remarkable career was about to begin. In 1956, Johnny Cash was inside a Sun Records studio with fellow musicians Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis when an unexpected visitor walked in, Elvis Presley. The 4 young artists began singing together while producer Sam Phillips quietly kept the tape running. None of them knew the moment would later become famous as the $1 Million Quartet. Yet, at the time, Cash himself was far from a $1 million star. He still hadn't landed the big hit that could change his life. Later that same year, everything shifted when he wrote I Walk the Line. The song, a quiet promise of loyalty and devotion, climbed both the country and pop charts and finally gave Cash the success he had been chasing. But the message of the song would soon feel painfully ironic. Around this time, Cash grew close to singer June Carter. Their connection had strange beginnings. Elvis Presley, a friend of Carter's, often played Cash's records for her on jukeboxes during tour stops. Cash already knew her voice well, and when they finally met backstage at the Grand Ole Opry in 1956, Carter later said it felt as if she already knew him. The attraction was immediate, but both were married, so they tried to ignore their feelings. Still, Cash's personal life grew increasingly complicated. Rumors followed him on tour, suggesting he was often unfaithful to his wife, Vivian Liberto. Stories later even claimed that while pursuing June Carter, he had also become involved with her sister, Anita, revealing a restless side of the man who had just promised the world he would walk the line. By 1958, Johnny Cash and his wife, Vivian Liberto, had moved to Southern California and welcomed their daughter, Rosanne. As Cash's fame continued to grow, the pressure of life on the road began to take its toll. Alcohol slowly crept into his routine, but it wasn't the only thing. While spending time in Nashville with fellow musician Waylon Jennings, the two reportedly relied on amphetamines to stay awake through exhausting tours and endless performances. The drugs kept him moving, but they also left Cash restless and unpredictable, a man battling his own rising storm behind the scenes. During this turbulent period, Cash released Ring of Fire, a song that would become one of the defining hits of his career. Yet the story behind the song was surrounded by conflicting claims and lingering tension. Some believed it had been written by June Carter, the woman Cash had grown increasingly close to, while others credited Cash himself, along with songwriter Merle Kilgore. According to Vivian Liberto, Cash once told her he had written the song while fishing with Kilgore and planned to share the credit with Carter simply because she needed the money. By then, Liberto felt her husband mention June Carter far too often, and resentment was beginning to grow. June Carter, however, often offered a very different explanation. She claimed the phrase "Ring of Fire" had come from a line she saw in an old book of Elizabethan poetry. Liberto dismissed that idea entirely, insisting the song's meaning was far less poetic and far more personal than people realized. The mystery surrounding its origin only deepened over time. Years later, the story took an even stranger turn when Kilgore, hoping to profit further from the song's success, reportedly suggested licensing it for a hemorrhoid cream advertisement. The proposal shocked many, and Carter's family quickly rejected the idea. Still, the bizarre suggestion added another odd chapter to the already complicated legend behind one of Cash's most famous songs, just as his life itself seemed to be drifting dangerously close to the flames. In June 1965, Johnny Cash set out on what should have been a quiet camping trip in California with his nephew, Damon Fielder. Instead, the outing turned into one of the most controversial episodes of his life. Somehow, the camper they were using caught fire, and the flames quickly spread into the surrounding wilderness. By the time firefighters finally contained it, the blaze had scorched hundreds of acres of the Los Padres National Forest. Authorities demanded answers, and Cash claimed that a stray spark from the camper had started the disaster, but his nephew told a different story. According to Damon, Cash had lit a fire to keep warm and, under the influence of pills, failed to notice how quickly it was spreading. The government eventually sued the singer, and Cash settled the case for a staggering $882,000. Yet the story didn't end there. The fire had also disturbed the habitat of several endangered California condors. When critics raised concerns, Cash reportedly brushed them off, dismissing the birds as nothing more than buzzards. The remark did little to improve his reputation among conservationists and added to the growing image of him as a reckless outsider. Ironically, while controversy surrounded him, Cash was also strengthening his outlaw legend through his music. Around this time, he began performing inside prisons, including the infamous San Quentin and Folsom facilities, recording live albums that captured the raw energy of those shows. Songs about hardship and confinement resonated deeply with the inmates, and writer Al Aronowitz once observed that Cash sang as if he truly belonged among the men behind bars. But the truth was more complicated than the myth. Although Cash had several run-ins with the law over the years, he had never actually served serious time. Most of his arrests ended with nothing more than a night in jail. Still, the image of Johnny Cash as a hardened outlaw had already taken hold, blurring the line between the man he was and the legend he had created. Despite his growing reputation as a rebellious outlaw, many of Johnny Cash's encounters with the law were surprisingly minor. On one occasion, he was accused of trespassing on private land, hardly a dramatic crime. In reality, Cash had wandered onto the property simply to pick a few wildflowers. Another incident unfolded in El Paso, Texas, where authorities suspected he was smuggling illegal drugs across the Mexican border. When they brought him in for questioning, officers expected to uncover something far more serious. Instead, they found prescription amphetamines. Cash escaped with little more than a warning, but the moment carried unexpected consequences. Newspapers soon printed photographs of Cash alongside his wife, Vivian Liberto. Because Liberto had a darker complexion, she was partly Sicilian and had African-American ancestry, white supremacist groups reacted with anger. The couple began receiving hateful letters and even threats to their lives. It was a painful reminder that fame often exposed their private lives to cruelty and prejudice. Cash's reckless streak continued in other ways as well. In 1967, after a car accident, authorities discovered prescription pills inside his vehicle. Although he reportedly tried to smooth things over, the sheriff refused any favors and instead gave him a serious warning. Cash later admitted that the moment shook him deeply and made him consider changing his life. By then, his marriage to Liberto had already fallen apart. As many had suspected, Cash turned his attention toward June Carter, but Carter refused to become involved with him while drugs still controlled his life. Determined to help him confront his addiction, she and members of her family moved into Cash's home, hoping their presence would push him to finally face the struggle he could no longer ignore. Johnny Cash eventually emerged from his home, appearing like a man determined to change. Not long after, during a concert in London, Ontario, he surprised the audience by proposing to June Carter on stage. She accepted, and within a week, the two were married in Kentucky. For a moment, it seemed as though Cash had finally found stability, yet the reality was far more complicated. Although he tried to leave pills behind, the struggle with addiction quietly continued during the early years of their marriage. In 1970, the birth of their son, John Carter Cash, gave him a powerful reason to try again. Still, troubling shadows lingered around that period. Rumors later surfaced that even while June was expecting their child, Cash had once again sought out her sister Anita, reviving a past affair. His battle with addiction also refused to disappear. By 1977, he had slipped back into using amphetamines and eventually sought help at the Betty Ford Clinic. Though he managed periods of recovery, the cycle was difficult to break, and by 1989, the pills had returned. Even so, while facing these private struggles, Johnny Cash was about to enter millions of American homes through television, becoming more famous than ever. In 1969, the television network ABC approached Johnny Cash with a proposal that would bring his music and personality into living rooms across the country. They wanted him to host a weekly variety program. Cash agreed, but not without hesitation. The network promised him a great deal of artistic freedom, yet they also insisted that the show feature well-known Hollywood personalities, many of whom Cash felt little connection with. He reluctantly accepted appearances from entertainers like Bob Hope and Peggy Lee, though it was clear that he preferred artists whose voices reflected real struggles and honest storytelling. Where Cash truly drew the line, however, was censorship. One famous moment occurred when Chris Christopherson appeared on The Johnny Cash Show to perform his song Sunday Morning Coming Down. The lyrics contained the word stoned, something the network executives found too controversial for television. They demanded the word be replaced. Cash refused. To him, altering the lyric meant stripping the song of its truth. His quiet but firm stand showed the same stubborn independence that had always defined him. While Cash's public life flourished, his family life carried its own complicated emotions. His daughter Rosanne Cash later admitted that she struggled with resentment during her childhood. Her father had spent so much of his life on the road that she often felt he wasn't truly present while she was growing up. Still, time eventually softened those wounds, and father and daughter were able to rebuild their relationship before it was too late. On September 12, 2003, Johnny Cash passed away from complications related to diabetes, only 4 months after the death of his beloved wife, June Carter Cash. With his passing, one of music's most distinctive voices fell silent. Yet even after his death, new stories and mysteries about his life continued to surface. One of the more curious revelations involved Cash's long-held belief that he had Cherokee ancestry. During the late 1950s, he had spoken passionately about Native American issues and recorded songs that defended their history and struggles. At the time, many country music fans preferred romantic tales about cowboys and frontier life, and Cash's focus on Native American themes was seen as unusual. His conviction came from the belief that he shared their heritage. Years later, Rosanne Cash appeared on the genealogy series Finding Your Roots to learn more about her family history. The results were surprising. Genetic research found no evidence of Native American ancestry in the family line. Instead, the test revealed distant African roots far back in her lineage. The discovery quietly challenged a story Cash himself had believed for most of his life. Yet history often remembers people through the legends surrounding them rather than the facts alone. In a small Mississippi town, Cash's memory is honored in a much lighter way. Decades earlier, he had been briefly arrested there after wandering onto private property to pick flowers. The minor offense became part of local folklore. In 2007, the town of Starkville, Mississippi, decided to embrace the story rather than forget it. That November, they held the first Johnny Cash Flower Pickin' Festival, officially pardoning him for the long-ago incident. It was a fitting tribute for a man whose life was filled with contradictions, an outlaw who often broke only the smallest rules, a singer who carried both darkness and compassion in his voice, and a legend whose story continues to grow even after the final note faded.